Welcome, everybody, to our Siyum Masechet Sukkah, Siyum on the go. We are so excited that you're here with us, whether on Zoom or whether virtually. Our Siyum Masechet Sukkah is dedicated by Miriam Tannenbaum in memory of her dear mother, Ruth Zemsky, Rezel Bat Yoshua Halevi V'chaya Kila Zichrona Levracha. Its fifth yahrzeit was observed yesterday, 23rd of Elul. In her life's quest of Avodat Hashem, she embodied the oft-quoted motif in Masechet Sukkah of Dorachea Dorchei Noam. Her ways were ways of pleasantness. Her example continues to inspire her children and grandchildren. Yehi Zichra Baruch. And thank you to Jonathan Katz for sponsoring Masechet Sukkah in memory of his mother, Margaret Katz, Ruth Bat Avraham. We're still looking for a Masechet Beitzah sponsor if somebody is interested. And I'll give you some background now, even though I was thinking of doing it at the end, but maybe I'll do it at the beginning to talk about the Siyum and what's going to be. So we're going to learn the first daf together momentarily, the last daf together momentarily. We are, then afterwards, you can access the full Siyum. It's already on the homepage. You can click on the picture at the top. You can get the Siyum there. You can also get it. There's a link in the podcast description if you're listening by podcast. There's a link. You can get it from our mailing list where you'll get an email, and in the email is a link to the daf. You can get there in that way also. If you have any issues, you can let us know and we'll help you find it. It shouldn't be so hard to find. I want to thank all of our amazing speakers, Dr. Shana Schick, lecturer at Shalem College, Amudim, and Trisha, who just published a book that might interest people called Intention in Talmudic Jurisprudence, Between Thought and Deed. Very interesting topic, one that we discuss many times. So she will speak about intention of the specific shita of Rav Chisda relating to intention in Masechet Sukkah. We'll hear from Dr. Yael Ziegler, who is the Rosh Batei Midrash, and academic director of Matan, in fact, starting her job today. So very nice that we're lucky to have had her teach for us today, speaking specifically about rain and the theme of rain in Masechet Sukkah. You might have thought that was a topic for Masechet Ta'anit, but also Masechet Sukkah. So first of all, B'atzlacha, Yael, in your new job. And we're very privileged that you took the time to be with us at the Siyum today. Rabbanit Yael Shimoni of Gefet, the assistant Rosh Yeshiva at Drisha and director at Meshivat Nefesh. She also gave a shiur on connecting the temple, the connection between the temple and the Mikdash and Sukkah. Very interesting topic. This is part of Gefet, which, as you know, or maybe you don't know yet, but I'll remind everyone, Gefet is an ongoing weekly shiur that we have on our site that only recently, from the beginning of Masechet Sukkah, is also in English. So it's great content to learn. It's an in-depth shiur, high level. So you can listen in general on Hadron's website. You can find that on a weekly basis in the Beyond the Daf, and also there's the Gefet section. So thank you all for joining us. I'll wish you at the end also, but Mazal Tov and all those who are about to finish the Masechet. Thank you for all those who joined us, even if you're not finishing. It's a great time to start learning the Daf if you haven't started, because we have 6 Masechtot in 6 months, starting tomorrow, Masechet Beitzah. And I'll just add one more thing, which is first day of school in Israel here. And even for places where it's not, many people are starting the new year, new jobs, new schools, new everything, whether it's today or not today. But I'm wishing everyone good luck in your new endeavors, good luck in school, and Hashana Tova to everyone. With that, we will get started with our daf. Okay, Bechiluk Lechem Hapanim. So we're ending our Masechet. I mentioned this yesterday, I'll mention it again today. It's a mirror image of Yoma. Yoma started with the temple and the sacrifices moved into, right? We got into all sorts of issues of what do you call it? Chevrati issues, issues of jealousy and all that between the Kohanim that we saw in the temple. We're going to have the same thing today, but here it's coming at the end of the Masechet. Okay, whereas and then Yoma ended with, what do we do today on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur? On Yom Kippur, how do we handle? And today we're doing the reverse. In Masechet Sukkah, we started with the every day, or I would say every year, things that relate to Sukkah, building the Sukkah, the Arba meaning, and only then did we get to the temple. And when we started with the temple, we even got to other things that go on in the temple, and only at the end do we get to the sacrifices. So it's a very reverse approach. I don't have reason as to why. I just wanted to point it out. I think it's very interesting, and it ends very much, and it makes you think about Yoma, about all the issues of jealousy and the social issues that come up in the context of the temple. And particularly, we're going to see today that at the very end, they want to relate it to us, also as well, that we can learn from the way they came up with structures in the Mishnah in the time of the temple, to kind of put everything in its place, right? So everyone knew what their jobs were, which portions they got, so that they wouldn't be fighting, right? We have to also take that into our lives about how to live in a society with other people and how to interact in a proper manner. So we're going to start right now with Bechiluk Lechem HaPanim. So what we said in the Mishnah was that the Mishmarot, by the way, I did a little bit more research last night, and I discovered what I was confused about. There's good reason why I was confused about it. I always thought that the Mishmarot, there were 24, times 2 is 48. That covers almost the whole year. A few more weeks, well, that was the holidays. The holidays covered the other weeks, and that everybody came twice a year to do their job. And the other weeks that kind of there was no one to do it, well, those were holiday weeks. So everything was kind of covered in that way. That matches a different approach that's not the approach of our Mishnah. And it seems to be there's a debate about how the Mishmarot worked. And it says in certain sources that in Nisan, Yehoyariv was the first family. They started, and it always went in the same order, starting in the beginning. I think it was Nisan it starts. I don't remember actually Nisan or Tishrei. Anyway, a good question for today, because we're standing right before Rosh Hashanah. There's a big debate, which is Rosh Hashanah. Is it the first of Nisan, the first of Tishrei? So I don't remember exactly where the Avodah starts. I think it's Nisan. Anyway, it would go in order every year. They would start Nisan, which basically means you have to finish out the year, and that's how it worked. This Mishnah clearly disagrees with that approach, because this Mishnah talks about how there's this issue between the Mishmar that everybody comes those weeks, plus though there is a particular Mishmar for that week. So that basically there's a 48-week cycle, which it doesn't cover the whole year. And even if you go by the other option that I mentioned earlier, you still have a problem. What happens in the leap year? How does it work out? So there's no real, I don't know what the answer is to that, but I didn't see anyone really relate to it. But it's a big question there about how the Mishmarot worked. Was it just 48 every week, right? Do you start the first time and then it just keeps going? Every 24 weeks you switch and you start again, and it has nothing to do with a calendar year at all. That's what our Mishnah seems to be implying, because otherwise there's no way to really get to complete the entire year. So in any case, what did we learn? We were talking about who gets what. So we said that all the Mishmarot on the weeks of the holidays share all the holiday regalim. That was the imurei regalim, all the special holiday sacrifices. And they also get to share the bread, the showbread, which really is matzah. If you remember, they get the showbread. So now the Gemara asks, the very bottom of Nun Ham Bet, Tanu Rabbanan, we quote a braita, Minayin shekol mishmarot shavot bechiluk lechem hapanim. How do you know that they're all equal and they all get a share of the lechem hapanim? Talmud Lomar, as it says in the pasuk in Sefer Dvarim, chapter 18, chelek kachelek yochelu. Part by part, they will split. Why part by part? Why just not chelek yochelu? They'll get their portion. Or why does it say portion in portion they will get? Double language. Kechelek avodah, kachelek achila. Just like they do the work, they also get to eat. Now, the problem with this drasha is, umay achila. What kind of eating are we talking about? Ilema korbanot, if you want to say they get the food of the korbanot, whether it's meat in the korbanot that get eaten, or whether it's the hides of the korbanot that all get burnt. So if you want to learn that from here, mehatam nafka, we already have a different verse which teaches it. La kohena makliv ota lo tiyeh. It already says in Sefer Vayikra, whoever does the work, they get the parts of that korban, that sacrifice. So there's no point to tell you that again. So therefore, it must be coming to teach something additional, not connected to the sacrifices. What is it? Lech ela lechem hapanim. It must be teaching you about the lechem hapanim. To which they now say, okay, so that means if you're working in the temple, not only do you get the portion of whatever sacrifice you did, but you also, in this case, it would be, the holiday portions get divided equally between everybody. Also, you're going to get the lechem hapanim of that week. The showbread, which was 12 loaves, is going to be split equally among all the kohanim that came to work. Right? You can imagine they each didn't get such a big piece. I mean, it happens they were gigantic loaves, but still, it wouldn't be a lot. Maybe they also get, now if you remember the end of yesterday's Mishnah said, there's certain things though, that whoever's job it was to be there that week, if it was his turn, then they would get the tzmidim, the morning and the afternoon sacrifices, all the regular offerings, the nidarim and nidavot, any voluntary offerings that people brought, which we already said was a bit of an unfair advantage, whoever's week that was, because they would get more because many more voluntary offerings came in the holidays because people were coming anyway to the temple, and therefore they would bring all their voluntary offerings then. So they would get extra more than the person, let's say, last week got. And shar korbanot zibul umakriv et hakol. These are two lines we're going to have to understand from the Gemara later what they mean, which is all other additional communal offerings. What does that mean? We'll see. And makriv et hakol, and they sacrifice everything. What does that line mean? We're going to get to that in a few minutes. But the main point is here, now they're going to say, how do you know then? If you're already in the temple and you get everything, then maybe you would think that it's everything. Maybe all 24 mishmarot, everyone who comes to the temple gets to split everything, even the tamid shel shachar, ben arbaim, all the daily sacrifices, the nidarim and nidavot, maybe they would. Well, the end of that pasuk, chelik kachelek yochelu, says, well, not everything. What does it say? Talmud lomar, livad mimim karav al ha'avot. Other than the sellings or the business dealings of their fathers. What kind of business dealings did their fathers do? So, ma machlu ha'avot zelazeh. What did they sell to each other? Ani b'shabati v'ata b'shabatcha. The whole institution of mishmarot is to say, listen, I'm going to get my week, and in exchange for that, I'm giving you the rights to get your week. So that means whatever they normally got in a normal week, that's excluded from the parts. That's how they learn it from this pasuk. So it's almost like they viewed it as a negotiation. The fact that there are mishmarot basically said, I'm willing, and again, this talks about social, in order to keep a normal social environment here and keep everybody in check, right? I'm going to be willing to give up my portion so that I know I have my week and that no one's going to steal my week and try to come. And, if everybody works in my week, I'm going to get so little. So I'm willing to do that. So anyway, that, because the pasuk says, chelik kachelek yochelu, they get their portion, but then it also says that other than levamim karav alavotav, okay, other than what they already agreed. Now we said that on Shavuot, what happens? You get also the shtei halechem. You get shtei halechem, which is a bread that was actually chametz kind of bread, as opposed to almost everything in the temple is not chametz. The lechem apanim, even though we call it bread, it's really matzah, okay? It's not leavened bread. It doesn't look like matzah. It's not flat like matzah, but it is unleavened bread. So ba'atzeret, when they give out the bread, what do they give out? How do they give it out? They say, helach matzah, helach chametz. Here's your matzah, which is your lechem apanim, which is the weekly one. And here's your chametz, which is special for Shavuot. Now the Gemara is going to stop for a minute, move on to a different machloket, and then connect it back to here. But it's going to take us a little while to get there. So we're going to now talk about something much more relatable to us, which is Sukkah. When you make the bracha, and we're back to the topic of Sukkah, even though we kind of got off of it because we're now talking about how they divide up on Shavuot. So Itmar, it was said that Rav Amal Sukkah v'achar kach zman. What's the order of Shechianu? Do you say Leshe Basukkah and then Shechianu? This is assuming that you say Shechianu in when you say Kiddush. Do you say Leshe Basukkah and then Zman, then Shechianu? Rabbi Bar Chana Amar Zman v'achar kach Sukkah. Says no. First Shechianu, then Leshe Basukkah. Okay, we actually do what Rav says. We say Leshe Basukkah and then we say Shechianu. But Rabbi Bar Chana says it's the reverse. So what's the reasoning? Rav Amar, you could see this charted out on the sheet. Rav Amar Sukkah v'achar kach zman, chiyuv v'diyoma adif. We want to go by what the main idea of the day is. The main thing is Sukkah. Shechianu is not specific for Sukkah. It's just a general bracha. We want to go with what the main bracha is today. That's sitting in the Sukkah, the main obligation of the day. Rabba Bar Chana Amal Zman v'achar kach Sukkah. Why? Going back to what we said yesterday. Tadir v'sheino tadir. Tadir kodem. We always go by what's more frequent. How often do you say Leshe Basukkah? 7 days a year. How often do you say Shechianu? Many more times a year. So Shechianu comes first. So Lema, Rav, Rabba Bar Chana, we're still not going to connect this yet to us. We're now going to try to connect it to a different machloket, a machloket we've seen before in Masechet Brachot and in Masechet Pesachim. It's a good review. Why don't we say that they're debating a topic that was already debated by Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel? How so? They have some disagreements about meals and things we do at meals. So the disagreement we're going to quote is about Kiddush. What's the order of Kiddush on Friday night? Do you say Mekadesh Shabbat and then Borei Pri Hagafen? Do you make first the bracha on the sanctity of Shabbat and then on the wine? Or is it the reverse, wine and then Kiddush? We actually do wine and then Kiddush. Okay, so let's see. Beit Shammai omrim mevarech al hayom, first Mekadesh Shabbat, v'achar kach mevarech al hayayin, then the wine. Ubeit Hillel omrim mevarech al hayayin, v'achar kach mevarech al hayom. So he says the reverse. Now we're going to see each one is going to give two reasons. And each one of them, one of their reasons is going to match up to Rav and Rabba Bar Chana. But one is not going to match up, and that's where in the end we're going to reject it based on that. So Beit Shammai omrim mevarech al hayom, v'achar kach mevarech al hayayin, first the day, then the wine. Why? Shayom gorem layayin sheyavo. It's the day that causes us. Why are we making Kiddush today? Because of the day. It's the day that's important. This sounds like chiyuva diyoma adif, right? Like it's what's today is what's important. Second, he says is ukvar kiddush hayom va'adayin yayin lo ba. And by the way, when we get to Kiddush, it's already Shabbat came in already. And we didn't have wine necessarily, right? That means that the day is more important because it preceded the bringing of the wine. First wine, why? Without wine, we wouldn't be saying Kiddush. Now, it's not exactly true. You could have bread. You could have an alternative for the wine. But without an alternative, if you don't have food, drink something, there's no Kiddush. I'll give you an example. Yom Kippur. You don't make Kiddush on Yom Kippur. So what do you see here? Without that, right, there is none. So therefore, the wine comes first. Davar acher, second answer, and here you'll already see the connection. Birchat hayayin tedira, uberchat hayom ena tedira. Which comes more frequently? We definitely drink wine more frequently, at least some of us, more frequently than we make Kiddush. And therefore, we're going to say the wine comes first, right? I'm thinking my husband who only drinks wine when he makes Kiddush. So maybe for him, it would be an exception. But generally, you would say, right, you drink wine more frequently than you do. Certainly in those days, they always drank wine. And therefore, that would come first. Tadir v'sheino tadir, tadir kodem. We always go with what's more frequent. So let's match them up. Lema Rav damar kebeit Shammai, v'Rabba bar Chana damar kebeit Hillel. Right, Rav says like Beit Shammai, it's what's the central theme of the day that comes first. Sukkah, before Shechianu, and Kiddush Hayom before wine. The Rabba Bar Chana, who goes by Tadir v'Sheino Tadir, Tadir Kodem, Shechianu comes first. Also, will go like Beit Hillel, the wine comes first. So now we're going to say no. Each one could explain the other one like him. How so? Amar l'charav, ana da'amre afilu leBeit Hillel. I'm going to explain myself according to Beit Hillel. How so? Ad kan lo ka'amre Beit Hillel hatam. Notice his other reason. What was his second reason? Yes, it's true. He said Tadir v'Sheino Tadir Tadir Kodem. But he also said it's wine that causes Kiddush to be said. Let's match that up to Sukkah and Zman. Right? Okay. Aval hacha, ilav Zman. If we didn't say Shechianu, milo omrin on Sukkah, what happens on the second night of Sukkot? Do you say Leshe Basukkah? Or the second time you sit in the Sukkah, you say Leshe Basukkah, even though you don't have Shechianu. Shechianu is not what causes the bracha of Sukkah, of Leshe Basukkah. So it's not the same thing at all. The Rabba Bar Chana Amar Lecha, he would say to you, Ana da'amre afilu leBeit Shammai. I'm going to explain my approach according to even Beit Shammai. Ad kan lo amre Beit Shammai hatam, ela shahayom gorem layayin sheyavo. Beit Shammai only said it because the yom causes the wine to come. Again, let's try to compare this to our case, right? We wouldn't be drinking this cup of wine were it not for the holiday. Aval hacha, ilav sukkah, milo omrin azman. What if I wasn't in a sukkah? Let's say it's raining and I don't eat in my sukkah. Do I say Shechianu at night? Of course I do, just like I say on Pesach, just like I say on Shavuot. It's not the sukkah that's causing the chiyuv of Shechianu, but it is Kiddush that causes the wine. So therefore, it's not the same. Okay, that was all. The whole connection to Beit Shammai Beit Hillel isn't really relevant to us right now. Okay, they brought it in because they thought it compared. The main part is that now they want to take this machloket of Rav, really this opinion of Rav, that first you say Sukkah, then you say Shechianu, and they want to say that our Mishnah raises a problem on his approach. Why? Tana. Ba'atzeret omer lo, helach matzah vehelach chametz. Which is the matzah? The lechem apanim. The chametz is the special korban for Shavuot. That comes second. Bahahacha, de chametz ikar umatzah tafel. Okay, they use the words of tafel and ikar. Chametz is the main thing, meaning The chametz is the special, unique sacrifice for today. That's today's obligation. Of course, we're going to do that one first. And yet, what is it, right? According to Rav, you go by the obligation of the day comes first, rather than something that happens all the time. V'katane, helach matzah, vehelach chametz. And yet it says here, helach matzah and helach chametz. By the way, I just want to point out here, we always use this principle, tadir v'sheno, tadir kodem. But we've seen a number of times that sometimes it's debatable. In this case, Rav clearly doesn't hold by that principle. He thinks go with what's unique first, right? Which one can understand. There's a logic to both positions, and that's why both positions exist. So now they say tiyuv to Rav. It's really a question on Rav. To which Rav, or the Gemara answers for Rav, Amar l'charav, he could say, Tanaihi, don't throw a Tanaitic source at me and say, oh, you don't agree with this Mishnah, because I have a different source, he could say. And he didn't answer this, but later they answered this question for him. Ditanya, helach matzah vehelach chametz, that's like our Mishnah. But Abba Shaul Omer, there's a different position of Abba Shaul, helach chametz vehelach matzah. If you remember, Abba Shaul often talks about things that happened in the temple. And again, we're back to another debate about what happened in the temple, right? What did they say? Did they say, here's your matzah, here's your chametz, and give you the matzah first, the lechem apanim? Or did they give you the shei lechem first? So Rav says, oh, I'm relying on Abba Shaul's opinion, and our Mishnah was relying on Tanakama. By the way, Gita reminded me that it was Rav Hai Gaon who basically talks about how Yehoyariv starts, and thank you for telling me it was Nisan. Okay, I was right that it was Nisan, starts that Yehoyariv would start in Nisan. So that's his position. Okay, Darish Rav Nachman bar Rav Chisda. So now the question is, how do we hold? Now, we already know how we hold because we say Sukkah and then we say Zman. But the Gemara is going to show different opinions. Rav Nachman bar Rav Chisda said, Lo kedivrei Rav. He doesn't hold like Rav, not like we do. He doesn't hold like Rav. Da'amal Sukkah v'achar kach Zman. Doesn't hold by that position. Ella, he holds Zman v'achar kach Sukkah. First you say Shachianu, then you say Sukkah for the reasons of Tadir v'sheno Tadir. Rav Sheshet, Rav Idi Amar, but he said Sukkah v'achar kach Zman. He holds like we do, and the Gemara says, and this is why we do it, Hilchata Sukkah v'achar kach Zman. The Gemara decides this is the halacha. This is what we do. Okay. Next, now we have to deal with those two last phrases in the Mishnah that we didn't understand what they meant. Mishmar shezmano kavua, we said gets this and that, and Shar korbanot tzibor, all the other communal offerings. Latuye mai, what is this coming to include? Latuye, you might have not expected this. Par helem davar shel tzibor v'sirei avodat kochavim. If there's two cases where if the Beit Din teaches something incorrectly, they teach a law, and the community goes and does that law incorrectly, they have to bring one korban for everyone called the par helem davar shel tzibor. And if what the Beit Din taught had to do with with avodah zarah, then there's a special one they bring. They don't bring a bull offering, they bring a Siur. Okay, and that's the Sirei Avodat Kochavim. If they taught something incorrectly, the has to learn all this in depth in Masechet Horayot, Bezrat Hashem in a few years. Then again, what would happen if that sacrifice was to have been brought that week? Then only the mishmar whose job it was that week, whose turn it was, gets the meat or whatever parts they get of that, probably just it's just the hides. They actually get burnt. So whatever parts they would get, that's the parts they would get, but they don't really get much of it anyway. What does it mean? He sacrifices everything. What's everything? Latuye mai, you might remember this from Shkalim, Latuye ketzam mizbeach. Remember all those offerings that when the mizbeach lies idle and there's no sacrifices going on, you fill it up with all this extra money that we didn't know what to do with. We put it toward what we call a lot nidava, voluntary offerings that all get burnt on the altar. So they get the hides of, they're the ones who are in charge of sacrificing those. You have to imagine that on the holidays, it was unlikely there was any time that the mizbeach wasn't working because there were so many extra sacrifices that people would bring. Like I said, they're voluntary offerings, all the holiday offerings, but potentially if there were, they would be the ones to sacrifice that. It shows you, by the way, how far they go to make it clear what all the rules are, right? You think about, I don't know, in my mind, it's Corona and we're starting school today and there's all these rules and you have to read them super carefully, right? So that everybody knows what's supposed to happen and what you're supposed to do and what tests you have to take and what happens if, and right, this is like laying out every single detail so that there's no disagreement among the Kohanim about who gets what and whose job is what. And it really reminds us of Masechet Yoma and all the things that we learned there. Okay, new Mishnah. Yom Tov hasamuch l'Shabbat, ben milefanea ben la'achareha, Hayu kol hamishmarot shavot b'chiluk lechem hapanim. If Yom Tov, again, it sounds surprising. This is how we end the Mishnah, our Masechet. If we're getting into a lot of details here, if Yom Tov falls before Shabbat or after Shabbat, but next to Shabbat, adjacent to it, then, right, we already discussed if Shabbat is in the middle of the holiday, then everyone splits the Lechem HaPanim. What if Shabbat is up against it, right? I think about flying, right? You want to fly and get to Israel in time for the Chagim, okay? Make sure you don't land on Chag, right? You have to leave earlier because you won't get there, right? Otherwise, you won't get there in time. So it's like that. They wouldn't make it into, you can't travel on Shabbat, right? So let's say you want to get here for, a holiday. You probably, let's say the holiday is on Monday. So you probably have to come before Shabbat already because we're flying, because there's no way to get in time, right? So let's say you're going from America to Israel or something like that. So likewise here, if they wanted to be in the temple on Sunday or Friday, well, then they had to be there on Shabbat. They couldn't travel. So Yom Tov Shabbat, whether it's before or whether it's after, they would again share the portion of the bread because they were all had to be there for Shabbat, even though it's not part of the holiday. What if there was a one-day break? The holiday was Monday or the holiday was Thursday. Then what do you do? The two, it really should be mishmarot. The two mishmarot whose job it was normally, and we're going to see this in a minute, the lechem hapanim was split in half, or somewhat in half, we'll see, between, you might remember this from Masechet Shkalim, between the mishmar that was leaving and the mishmar that was coming in, because they always switched jobs middle of the day on Shabbat. So they would get 10 loaves. Remember, there were 12. And the other two, hamitakev notel shtayim, anyone who had to stay over Shabbat because they lived too far away that they couldn't make it in a day, they would then get 2 portions. Ubishar yemot hashana, but normally what happens, right? You would think they would have told us this first, but normally what happens, hanichnas notel shesh, hayotze notel shesh. The one that comes in gets 6, the one that goes out gets 6. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, hanichnas notel sheva, vayotze notel chamesh. He had a different numbering system, dividing system. He said 7 to 5. Hanichnesim chokim b'tzafon, vayotzim b'darom. Another thing, where would they divide it up? The ones who left would wait in the northern part of the temple to get their bread, and the ones that were starting their jobs, and the ones that were leaving would do it on, did I do it? Yeah. And the ones that were leaving would go on the south side. What's the significance? North side is always the better side, because that's where all the high level sanctity sacrifices get slaughtered. That's the important part. Okay. So when you're the one coming in, you get it in the north. We'll talk about this more in the Gemara. Bilga, but the family of Bilga, which was one of the Kohanim families, La'olam choleket b'darom, always gets in the south. They never get in the north. Taba'ata kfu'ah, her ring, they had rings in the floor that were basically to hold the animal down while they slaughtered. It's in the Beit Mitbachayim section in the north of the temple. The ring, normally it would be like a semicircle, and it would open up. You put the animal in, hold the animal down while you slaughtered it. Their ring was stuck into the ground and never opened, which either meant, some of the commentaries say it means they had to borrow someone else's, or these are all punishments, by the way. We'll see why later. Or it could be that they had to slaughter it without a ring, and that was more of a punishment, right? So that's two different options. The chalonastuman, her window was sealed shut. A window could be, each one had a window that brought in light toward their area of working in the temple, and theirs was closed, so they didn't have good lighting. Some people said that there was a window, like a section where all the knives were, and that theirs was locked shut and they couldn't use their knife, which is similar to not being able to use their ring and they had to use someone else's. Some people say it's their clothing was in a box and that was locked up and they couldn't get to their clothing. Okay, and again, they had to use someone else's, which was seen as a punishment. So now we have this Mishnah, which had a lot of things not clear, we're now going to start to understand. What does it mean that the holiday Yom Tov was next to Shabbat, either before or after? If you want to say the first day of the holiday was on Friday, and then it was Shabbat, that can't possibly be because Yom Tov Achon Hainu Shabbat Shebetoch HaChag, right? If you're going to say that, then you're going to, or Lefaneha and Lachareha was the last day of the Chag, right? And before it was the first day of the Chag. Then it's actually a Shabbat in the Chag, and that we already discussed in the previous Mishnah. So it can't be that. Therefore, it must be Yom Tov Acharon, Yom Tov Rishon. Before Shabbat means the last day of the holiday was Friday, and then it was Shabbat. Right? That's what we call, right? We call it a 2-day chag, even though it's not really, right? It would be one next to the other, and you'd end up with 2 days next to each other, one of chag, one of Shabbat. Lachareha means Yom Tov Rishon was after it, meaning the holiday started the next day. So Shabbat was Shabbat, and Sunday was the holiday. That's what they were referring to. And then again, everyone would split the lechem apanim because you had no choice but to be there, right? And that's what they're going to explain right now. My taima kevan dahane makadme, bahane ma'achle, because those had to come early or those had to stay late. Tiknu Rabbanit milta ki echad yinechlu bahade adade. They made it so that everyone would get a portion of food together. Chal Yom Echad. Now they're quoting a part of the Mishnah, but what they're really quoting here is Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. Rabbi Yehuda says 7 and 5 on a normal week. Why is it split 7 and 5? Why did they get an extra 2, the one that's coming in? Because they lock the doors. What does that mean? So it's not exactly clear exactly why they would get extra breads for this, but the point is that in the morning, the mishmar that's leaving opens the doors because they're in charge in the morning. And then theoretically, they should be closing them. So the fact that the new mishmar is kind of taking that responsibility and closing them, they get an extra 2 loaves on that day. It's not the most convincing answer. And in which case, the Gemara asks actually, V'nemele dal b'dal. Why wouldn't they just say, take away one of mine for this week and I'll take it next week, right? Wouldn't they rather have equal portions, 6 this week and 6 next week, rather than know that today I'm getting 7 and that's more, but next week I'm going to get only 5? Wouldn't they rather wait till next week and get 6 and therefore get only 6 today? So Amar Abaye, Utsina Tava Mikacha. A small cucumber or maybe gourd, it's unclear whether it's the same thing or different. I'd rather explain it like this. I think it makes sense. A small gourd is better than a bigger one later. Okay, I'd rather eat it now, the way it is now, right? Like a bird in the hand is worth 2 in the bush, right? I'd rather eat what I have now than wait till later, and who knows what will be later, even though it's a little bit strange here because they know it's going to be later. Okay, and this is on the website Talmudology by Jeremy Brown, Dr. Jeremy Brown. He has a very interesting website where he brings scientific articles. If you haven't seen it, recommended. He talks about the marshmallow, I forget what it's called, the marshmallow experiment, or where they did this experiment with children. And they said, I'll give you 1 marshmallow now, but if you wait 15 minutes, you'll get 2 marshmallows. Thank you, the marshmallow test. And you'll get 2 marshmallows. And then, right, it's very famous. And then they saw later on that the kids who waited and had patience to wait for the 2, right? It's exactly this, which is right. Would you rather have right now? I'm thinking of my avocados on my tree right now. Have avocados and they look beautiful. My kids said, can we pick them? I said, no. If you wait another month, they'll grow twice the size, right? Now you might want to eat them right now, but they'll be much better and bigger if you wait. So, right, both riper and larger. So they, right, the marshmallow test, basically the study showed that when they tracked these people later in life, that they were much more successful, the ones who were able to wait. And it's interesting because the Gemara, as usual, is talking about human nature. And many people don't like to wait and don't have that patience. But, his point of Talmudology was, even though the Gemara says this, right, you might want to rethink it and you might be better off waiting till they grow properly. But in any case, they often they do things by what the base, easiest human nature, what people instinctively do, which is, I'd rather take it now because who knows what's going to be later. Amar Rav Yehuda. Now, what about? Now we're into right now, we've left the holidays. We're into what happens on a weekly basis. So Shabbat comes, one group goes in, right, starts the morning service. We'll see how far they go. And then they swap jobs at a certain point of the day. So who does what? Again, you have to be very specific and get into all the rules and regulations so that there's total clarity here. Amar Rav Yehuda, ube musafin cholkin. When it comes to the musaf extra offerings on Shabbat, then they split it 50-50, meaning the hides of the musaf offering. So they bring now a question against him from a braita, meitive. Mishmara hayotzet osat tamid shel shachar umusafin. Mishmara nichneset osat tamid shel ben arbaim ubezichim. How do we split the work of the day? And they're not talking about the food. They're talking about the work or the hides. They're talking about who does what. In the morning, the old one does the morning sacrifice and the musaf sacrifice. And the one who leaves does the afternoon sacrifice and the offering of the frankincense that goes with the lechem apanim. If you remember, there were 2 bowls of frankincense. They have to be offered up like a ketoret, like an incense offering. So they would offer them up in the second group would do that. Ve'ilu musafin chokin lo katane. Notice it doesn't say they get part of the portion of the musaf. It would seem from here only the first mishmar gets it because they did the sacrifice. They therefore get the hides from it. So what do they answer? Don't worry about this. That wasn't his topic. He wasn't talking about dividing up. He was only talking about who does the work. Could be they do divide it up in that way. Shabbat stuff is portioned evenly because the bezichin, nobody gets anything. You don't eat that. So this way, one gets the afternoon, one gets the morning, and the extra one gets split 50-50. But but I'll bring you a braita from the house of Shmuel. It is talking about dividing up the food, and it doesn't say anything about dividing up the musaf. So I think you're wrong. It doesn't say anything. How do we see this? Same thing. They do the morning and the musaf. The new one, the afternoon and the frankincense. Then 2 kohanim go in to get the bread. So 2 go in there, 2 go out right from each side, and they split up the lechem apanim. Notice what it talks about, splitting up, dividing the food, the lechem apanim, and it doesn't mention anything. You would expect it here where it is talking about what gets divided up, that they would talk about also the musaf, and therefore tiyuvta de Rav Yehuda tiyuvta. It seems difficult how he said that. Okay. נכנסים חוקים בצפון, תנו רבנן. הנכנסים חוקים בצפון, כדי שיראו שהם נכנסים, והיוצאים חוקים בדרום, כדי שיראו שהם יוצאים. I have 2 images in my mind. Okay, they put those in the north and those in the south. That way we know who's who. Okay, so we don't get confused, right? When you go in an amusement park and you go on a ride, right? What happens? You leave a different exit where you come in because they want to make sure everyone empties out and then everyone goes in so that nobody tries to go in a second time, right? We want to make sure, again, the kohanim don't try to say, oh, I'm working this week again. So they split them up, right? And I'm thinking of also like teams. When you play a sport, this has one color, that has another color. We want to make it very clear who's on what team so that nobody tries to take a second portion or something like that. Okay, maybe someone will try to switch, right? Go from one to the other and take 2 portions. We're also maybe worried about that. So we want to make it very clear. Bilga lo'olam choleket b'darom. We're going to finish now with this Bilga family and what they got punished for. I'm sure you're very curious, right? For what reason would the rabbis punish this family of Kohanim? Tanu Rabbanan, Braita, that quotes the story. Maaseh b'Miriam bat Bilga, the daughter of Bilga, Miriam was her name. She'mira data, she left the religion. She married some big officer in the Greek kingdom. When they came into disgrace the sanctuary. She would kick with her sandal on the altar. Locust, locust, you wolf, wolf. Why a wolf? A wolf swallowed, right? Eats small animals. So does the altar, right? So locust, locust, right? If you think about the lambs that were brought every day, right? So the wolf eats those. You're just wasting the money of the people. They're just bringing all these animals all the time, spending all this money for no good reason. And you don't help them in their time of struggles, right? Which is kind of like saying, look, we're here destroying the temple and you're not even doing anything to stop it, right? Obviously, an altar doesn't really have power to do it. This is interesting. I'm right now connecting in my head between we spoke to the altar. Remember when in the tekes of the Arava, they talked to the altar, right? It was this weird thing. Why are they talking and praising the altar? This is similar. She's kind of doing the reverse, criticizing the altar. When the rabbis heard this, they locked up her ring and closed up her window. Okay. Thank you, Gita. Yofi lach mizbeach, yofi lach mizbeach. Okay. Now, sorry, I skipped the line. That's one opinion. So as a reaction, the rabbis punished her family. They were always late in coming. And what happens, this teaches you what happens if you come late and you don't show up on time. The one who was their job before, they wouldn't leave the temple because who else is going to do the sacrifices? So they would have to work harder. And it was punishment for them coming late. Now, here's the interesting thing. If you live next to Risha'im, you usually don't get rewarded. We always say, Oy l'rasha, oy l'shcheno, right? Woe is to you who lives near evil people, because you'll learn from them. Here, Yeshvav, who dwelled near them, which means their mishmar was right next to them, actually won out because Shchenei Bilga nistaklu. They got rewarded. How so? Shel Bilga lo'olam choleka b'darom v'yeshvav achiv batzafon. Since Bilga got punished that they always collect in the north, in the south, so that meant Yeshvav, both when they went in and when they went out, they would go on the north side. And also, by the way, they would get to work more and then also get more gifts because they would always come late. Now we're going to question this right. The one who says they were always late, then we understand why everyone got punished, right? The whole family got punished because they always came late. And some people say not everyone came late, but the majority of them came late. But you could see at least right? We're responsible, so the whole mishmar would get punished. Because of his daughter, we're going to punish him. So here's one of these great lines. Amar Abai in yes. When you hear the kid in the shuk, you see kids sometimes and they're cursing or they're speaking very bad, not nicely. You know that where did they learn it from? From their house, right? That it comes from the house, right? Sometimes I don't know about cursing, but I hear my kids sometimes speaking in a way that's not so nice. And I listen, I say, oh my God. And then I realize, why are they speaking that way? And then I realize I sometimes speak that way and they learn, they mimic me. And that's what he's basically saying. So if she was bad and spoke in such a disrespectful way, she must have learned that from home, right? Good lesson for parents. And, right, this is for all those who try to, if you go to therapy and they say, oh, it's not your fault that your kids are like this, this is the opposite. Well, it is your fault. Okay, so now, second question though. Okay, so her father and mother maybe are responsible. So the father should be punished, but mishum avua v'ime kansina lakula mishmara, but they're going to punish the entire mishmara? That doesn't make sense. So Amar Abaye, oy l'rasha, oy l'shchino. When you're here and when you're in the mishmar with other people, you're affected by them. Oy l'rasha, oy l'shchino, and that affects you. Tov l'tzadik, tov l'shchino. This is the way a lot of Sifrei Tanakh end with a repeat of the earlier pasuk because they don't want to end on a bad note. I think they didn't want to end on a bad note here, so they added this line, Tov l'tzadik, tov l'shchino. And by the way, it also works in the positive. Shene'emar, some people have this nusach, some people don't. Imru tzadik ki tov, say that tzadik, it's good. Ki prima alalehem yochelu, they're going to eat from the fruits of their labor. And notice yochelu is in plural. That shows not only are they going to eat, but they're going to bring other people along with them, and that's going to encourage good. With that, Hadran ala chachalil uslika la Masechet Sukkah. Before we end, I'll just say one quick word about the ending of this Masechet. And I think, again, as I started, I talked about how we're using the temple as a way to learn about how to run our lives, right? How we should be with other people. And specifically on Sukkot, we don't go by the approach of Rabbi Eliezer that Sukkah is always, right? A Sukkah is don't go to anyone else's Sukkah, but we do view Sukkot as a very communal holiday. And it's ending with all these communal rules and ideas and concepts about how to use community in a positive way, right? To surround yourself with people that have good values and all that. And that's the idea that they're coming at, again, taken from the temple. The temple is our model always. And there's some shiurim specifically in Hebrew and also Gefet in English, which compares how we learn from the temple and how we're trying on Sukkot to bring the temple into our own personal lives. Here, we're taking this concept of the temple of how to manage social interactions and bring it into our lives and bring out the good and the tov l'sadik, tov l'shcheno. So I wish everyone a Shana Tova and it should be a year, enjoy your Sukkot and your time with friends and use it all in a positive way. And may it be a good year and a year of new resolutions, lots of learning. And with that, we will do the Hadrans. So I will put them up on the screen for everybody to see. And here goes. Hadran alach Masechet Sukkah v'hadra chalan, dat hanalach Masechet Sukkah v'data chalan, lo nitnashem minach Masechet Sukkah v'lo titnashem minan, lo ba'alma haden v'lo ba'alma da'ate. Hadran alach Masechet Sukkah v'hadra chalan, dat hanalach Masechet Sukkah v'data chalan, lo nitnashem minach Masechet Sukkah v'lo titnashem minan, lo ba'alma haden v'lo ba'alma da'ate. Hadran alach Masechet Sukkah v'hadra chalan, da'atan alach Masechet Sukkah v'da'ata chalan, lo nitnashem minach Masechet Sukkah v'lo titnashem minan, lo ba'alma haden v'lo ba'alma da'ate. Yihi ratzon lefanecha Adonai Elohai v'Elohei avotai, shetehei toratcha umanutenu ba'olam hazeh, tehei imanu la'olam haba. Chanina bar Papa, Rami bar Papa, Nachman bar Papa, Achai bar Papa, Abba bar Papa, Rafram bar Papa, Rachish bar Papa, Surcha bar Papa, Ada bar Papa, Dalu bar Papa. Harev na Adonai Eloheinu et divrei Toratcha befinu v'piyot amcha Beit Yisrael. V'niyeh anachnu kulanu tzetzeinu v'tzetzei amcha Beit Yisrael kulanu yod'ei shemecha v'lemdei Toratecha lishma. Me'ovai techachmeni mitzvotecha ki la'olam ili. Yehi libi tamim b'chukecha leman lo evosh לעולם לא אשכח פקודיך כי בם חייתני. ברוך אתה אדוני למדני חוקיך, אמן, 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 סלע ועד. יהי רצון לפניך אדוני אלוהי, כשם שעזרתני לסיים מסכת סוכה, כן תעזרני להתחיל מסכתות וספרים אחרים ולסיימם, ללמוד וללמד, לשמור ולעשות ולקיים את כל דברי תלמוד תורתך באהבה. וזכות כל התנאים והאמוראים ותלמידי חכמים, יעמוד לנו ולזרענו, שלא תמוש התורה מפינו ומפי זרענו עד עולם. ויתקיים בנו, בתהלכך תנחה אותך, בשוכבך תשמור עליך, בעקיצות היא תשיחך. כי בי ירבו ימיך, ויוסיפו לך שנות חיים, אורך ימים בימינה, בשמאלה עושר וכבוד, אדוני עוז לעמו ייתן, אדוני יברך את עמו בשלום. I want to thank everybody for coming. I want to wish Mazal Tov to everybody. I want to thank all those who are listening, who will listen later. It's great having you all here with us. And we're so blessed to have such a beautiful community of people learning together on a daily basis and discussing words of Torah. Thank you, everybody.